right, everybody, welcome to the New York State Museum. I am Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History. And before we get started, I would like to take a few minutes to thank a few people. Last spring, the estate of Ray Faith Van Wart Robinson donated a family heirloom to the New York State Museum. Known as the Fidelity Medallion, it was awarded to Isaac Van Wart, one of the three men who helped capture the British spy Major John André near Tarrytown in September 1780. We are so incredibly honored to preserve this artifact for future generations of New Yorkers. Additionally, this medal is made even more special because the New York State Archives, located on the 11th floor of this building, has the papers that were stuffed in André's boot that laid out how to successfully take the American fort at West Point. And they are right here in these cases. He was given the information by the commander of the fort, Benedict Arnold, who we're going to learn more about today. The State Archives has graciously allowed for us to display these papers today in conjunction with the medal to kick off New York State History Month. To get us formally started with our New York State History Month celebration, I would like to introduce the New York State historian, Devin Lander.
Thank you. Thank you. And as Jennifer noted, this kicks off History Month. So those who don't know, October is History Month in New York State. And it's really, it was passed by an act of the legislature and is really an opportunity for us to think about our shared history here in New York, but also the work of historians and authors and archivists who preserve that history. So we will be having a series of speakers this month. We're starting today, and we will not be having any next week because it's Columbus Day weekend. But on the 15th, all of you are welcome to join us here in the Huxley for Dr. Christopher Minty's talk on Loyalists in New York City. And on the 22nd, we will be having a panel discussion on the unfinished revolutions, really a concept of the revolutions that have had to happen in New York and this nation as a result of the American Revolution being an unfinished revolution, right? The American Revolution was not for everyone and excluded whole parts of our population. And then on the 29th, kind of to end History Month, we will be having Dr. Scott Manning Stevens from Syracuse University, who will be speaking about indigenous representation in museums, his research as a Radcliffe Fellow. So it's really an exciting month here. It's also an exciting month at other institutions around the state who are doing programming related to History Month. You'll note that for us, there's an emphasis on the American Revolution this year, and that's because we are quickly going towards 2026, which will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. And so we are working at the state level with our partners across the state at the county levels and municipal levels, as well as other agencies, on conducting planning for the 250th. You'll see a field guide out on the table out there that is something we created with the Association of Public Historians. And it's really an opportunity for New York to be repositioned as significant as it really was during the American Revolution. Virginia's great and Massachusetts great, and they all have great history, but so does New York. And so much of the American Revolution took place here. New York was struggled over by both sides. And as I noted, other revolutions that have taken place, the suffrage movement, the Underground Railroad, gradual emancipation, and on and on. So please join us for History Month here at the Huxley throughout this month. And right now, I would like to get us officially kicked off. I'm very excited, as Jennifer noted, with the André papers and the Van Wart Medal. We thought that it would be no better person to kick off History Month than Jack Kelly. Jack Kelly is a journalist, he's a novelist, and a historian whose books include Band of Giants, which received the Daughters of the American Revolution's History Award Medal, and his newest book, God Save Benedict Arnold, The True Story of America's Most Hated Man. Jack has contributed to national periodicals, including the Wall Street Journal, and is a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow. He has appeared on the History Channel and was interviewed by National Public Radio. He grew up in a town in the Erie Canal corridor near Palmyra. I know exactly where that is. And now lives in New York's Hudson Valley. He's also been a guest on our podcast, A New York Minute in History. Jack Kelly.
Thank you, Devin. I want to thank Jennifer and Catherine and all the folks here at the State Museum. It's a great honor to be invited here, and they're keeping history alive day in and day out. As Devin mentioned, I'll be referencing my newest book, God Save Benedict Arnold. It's so new that it's not even out yet, but you can pick up you can pre-order a copy from any book retailer, or you can wait until December 5th when it'll be on the stands and just in time for Christmas. I heard one time that 24% of statistics are just made up on the spot. And I want to cite a statistic about Benedict Arnold that I'm going to make up. Benedict Arnold has more name recognition than any other soldier who fought in the Revolutionary War, 93%. And everybody that knows Benedict Arnold knows one thing about him. And I'm not going to say what that is because you know what it is. But I wrote the book in order to get across the idea there's more to Benedict Arnold than that one thing. And also that it's important to understand Arnold in order to get a clear view of the Revolutionary War. So I'm going to cite a few examples, just a few of the examples I cover in the book about his achievements. And my book is not a biography of Arnold so much as a manifesto or a making the case for Benedict Arnold. And I sometimes think of it as Benedict Arnold's greatest hits. 1775. The Revolutionary War began on the morning of April 19th when the Redcoats shot down and killed 8 Minutemen at Lexington Green. And the enraged patriots came back and killed 70 of the king's soldiers, and the war was on. 3 weeks later, on May 10th, 1775, Benedict Arnold captured the most strategic fortification in the 13 colonies at Fort Ticonderoga up on Lake Champlain in northern New York. And he not only captured it, but he went on to, on his own initiative, to go up into Canada and capture a sloop of war, which was the only warship that the British had on Lake Champlain, and thereby secured the lake for the patriots and protected Fort Ticonderoga from being quickly retaken. The question is, was that an important achievement? I think it was. The strategic objective of the British for the first 2 years of the war was to capture the water corridor that went from Montreal down Lake Champlain, down Lake George, down the Hudson River to New York City. And they figured if they got control of that corridor, they could isolate New England, split the colonies in half, and win the war. In addition, the cannon that were found at Fort Ticonderoga, many of them were dragged the next winter out to across the entire state of Massachusetts and allowed George Washington to have his first victory by driving the British out of Boston in March of 1776. So I think it's an important achievement. What do they say in the history books? It's barely a footnote. It's not given much importance. And often the credit is given for the capture of Ticonderoga is given to Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. The Green Mountain Boys were a vigilante group that Allen had gotten up before the war and really had nothing to do with the Revolutionary War. And the fact is that they did supply the manpower to take over Ticonderoga. But after the excitement was over, the Green Mountain Boys basically just went home. And Ethan Allen, if you look at his performance in that operation and his performance overall in the Revolutionary War, I don't know. I don't think I would have named a furniture company after him. But they do love him up in Vermont. So Benedict Arnold had the idea for taking over Ticonderoga. He had the leadership, and in particular, he had that initiative to gain control of the lake. So it was an achievement for Benedict Arnold. So the next question is, do we owe it to Benedict Arnold to get the history right? And I don't think we do. Benedict Arnold was a traitor. There's nothing in my book that in any way diminishes his treason. In fact, I think it's probably more severe, more grave than many people imagine it to be. So we don't owe him anything. We owe it to ourselves to get the history right and to sort of iron out the distortions. Because Benedict Arnold is a paradox. He's a hero, he's a villain. He supported the revolution, he tried to destroy the revolution. Those facts are hard to get your mind around, and many people feel uncomfortable and they want to erase the paradox by saying he was not a hero. His accomplishments were insignificant. His participation was minimal. His motives were suspect. And in some of the early biographies, they say he was a nasty little boy. And so he was obviously a traitor from the cradle. And he strangled baby birds. Those stories, which were made up from whole cloth, are easy to debunk, but the more subtle distortions of history that surround Benedict Arnold's treason is one of the reasons I wrote the book, to try to straighten out. I think another reason to pay attention to Benedict Arnold is that there are many paradoxical figures in our history. If you just think of Aaron Burr, or Andrew Jackson, or John Brown, even Thomas Jefferson, all men are created equal, I have the right to own slaves. There's a paradox involved. Arnold is a vivid and I think instructive example of that aspect of human nature, the paradoxical aspect. And those figures can be dangerous, and Benedict Arnold certainly was dangerous. So we jump ahead to 1776, the next year in the war, and the value of Ticonderoga is now proven because the British intend to gain control of that water corridor that I talked about that goes down Lake Champlain, but they can't do it immediately because the Americans control Lake Champlain with warships, so they have to build their own warships. So in 1776, during the summer, there was the beginning of an arms race. And Benedict Arnold is building mostly gunboats down at the south end of Lake Champlain, and the British are up in Canada building their own much bigger fleet. But it takes time. So there's a delay while this goes on most of the summer. By late August, Arnold decides to go up, takes a small fleet of boats and goes up to the north end of Lake Champlain and waits for the British to come down. The British are determined to have overwhelming firepower, but that takes time. It takes an extra month. So Arnold's waiting and waiting, and no sign of the British. He finally puts his little fleet in a bay between Valcour Island, which is just south of Plattsburgh, it's now today Plattsburgh, and the New York shore. It's about a mile-wide bay. Finally, on October 11th, this is very late in the season, the British come down with this massive fleet, massive firepower. Arnold's second in command says, we got to get out of here. This is suicide to stay here. But Arnold says, I have a plan. And he always had a plan, was what he was going to do. And he said, we're going to fight the Royal Navy and we're going to defeat them. And he was so persuasive and so confident that all of his captains of the other boats all got on board and said, let's go for it. They fought for 7 hours. It was a very brutal form of warfare, point blank cannon fire back and forth, and people being killed, maimed. It got dark. The battle ended, and the Americans were still standing. The British had not been able to break through their line. But they expended 3/4 of their ammunition, and many of their boats were damaged. Now what? Benedict Arnold said, I have a plan. We're going to escape. And the escape from that bay by Valcour Island is almost like a fairy tale. In the middle of the night, quietly, they were able to get out through the blockade that of all the British ships and boats, and head down the lake. The outcome of the entire campaign was that by the time the British got down to Ticonderoga, it was so late in the season, it was almost into November, that they felt that it was getting too cold, and they were afraid that the Lake Champlain would freeze behind them and they would be stuck down there. So they decided to go back to Canada, spend the winter in Montreal, and then come back and try again in the spring. So it was the campaign of 1776 in the North was a complete success, mostly attributable to Benedict Arnold. Was this an important achievement? Well, all you have to do is look at the other end of that corridor where there was another battle going on with George Washington facing a much bigger British army in New York City. And Washington lost the Battle of Brooklyn, the largest battle of the entire war. He lost New York City. He got pushed over into New Jersey. He lost in New Jersey and he got pushed into Pennsylvania. And he thought, and he wrote to his brother, he said, I think the game is pretty near up. He came that close to losing altogether. And his army, which had started out in New York with 20,000 men, was now down to 3,000 men. And if there had been a threat of invasion coming down the Hudson River, I think it would have been curtains for Washington. Plus, a lesser-known fact, Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates, who was in command in the north at Ticonderoga, took 600 men that were no longer needed at Ticonderoga and brought them down by boat to Kingston, New York. And then they got off the boats and marched out through northern New Jersey to Washington's camp in Pennsylvania. And some of the men who fought at Valcour Island also crossed the Delaware River on Christmas night and participated in what was Washington's most spectacular victory in defeating the Hessians at Trenton. So, an important achievement to have scored this victory in the North. What do the history books say? I can't say that it's just a footnote, because there was recently a book called Valcour, the 1776 campaign that saved the cause of liberty, that came out, that I wrote myself. And it's a pretty good book. I recommend it. But in researching that book, I was surprised at how little had been written about this major campaign in the North in one of the crucial years of the Revolution. And I picked up David McCullough's book, 1776. That was a book about the Revolutionary War by one of our great historians. I have a lot of respect for David McCullough. In that 1 year, and David McCullough didn't slight the campaign in the North, he just didn't mention it whatsoever. There's not a single mention of Benedict Arnold or the whole campaign in the North that was going on in the year that he was writing about. And I think it was he didn't want his story tainted by the treason of Benedict Arnold. It just made it too complicated. Let's just forget about it. But it's a distortion of history. So now we jump ahead again to 1777. Benedict Arnold decided to resign his commission in the Continental Army. He felt that he deserved promotions that he didn't get, which he did. He was pretty thin-skinned to begin with. And then he had the added insult of Congress decided to promote junior officers over his head. So men that he'd been ordering around could now order him around. That's a slap in the face to any officer, and his reason for resigning. And he wrote out his resignation. He went down to Philadelphia, and he turned in his resignation to Congress. The same day that he turned in his resignation, the news reached Philadelphia that Ticonderoga had fallen. And British General John Burgoyne, 7,000-man army, very large train of artillery, had captured Ticonderoga and were on the march towards Albany. Benedict Arnold forgot all about his resignation, jumped on a horse, rode up to the north, joined Horatio Gates, who was in command there now. The two of them decided to confront Burgoyne on the high ground beside the Hudson River, a few miles south of the village of Saratoga, which is now the village of Schuylerville. They fought two battles there on September 19th, 1777, and October 7th, collectively known as the Battle of Saratoga. In both battles, General Burgoyne tried to sweep around the left side, the left end of the American lines. In both battles, Benedict Arnold commanded the left wing of the American forces. In the first battle, he stopped General Burgoyne cold, inflicted a lot of casualties. In the second battle, he decisively defeated Burgoyne and then personally led a charge on horseback into the field fortifications the British had put up, broke through, and left Burgoyne in a position where he had to do what he said he would never do, which was to retreat. Benedict Arnold was severely wounded in that battle. He had a bullet shatter his shin bone. But General Burgoyne, 10 days later, had to surrender his entire army to General Gates. So is that an important achievement? They call it the turning point of the Revolutionary War. It brought the French in, changed the complexion of the war. Time magazine said that the Battle of Saratoga was the single most important battle anywhere in the world in the last 1,000 years. So it sounds pretty important. So what do they say in the history books? Well, they can't say it wasn't important, but they diminish the role of Benedict Arnold, and their stories about Benedict Arnold was drunk. He never left the American camp. He was sulking in his cabin. He'd been relieved of his command. And these stories are sort of circulated for years and years and years to prevent Arnold from getting the credit that I think he deserves. They can't deny that he was on the field because he was wounded in the battle, but they said he was riding around like a crazy man. Today, that idea is changing, and many authorities now agree that Benedict Arnold was the essential man in the essential battle of the Revolutionary War. 3 years later, in 1780, we come to that one thing that everybody knows about. And Benedict Arnold went over to the British. And the question, of course, is why did he do it? And many reasons have been given by different historians down the years. He did it for the money. He did it because he was somehow disgruntled. He did it because his wife made him do it. Now, he had married a 19-year-old loyalist young woman named Peggy Shippen. My own answer to that question is, I don't know. I can't imagine a reason so profound that it makes sense that he so completely changed and moved away from a cause that he was so devoted to. I think Benedict Arnold is an enigma that's we still haven't figured out. And sometimes I wonder whether he knew himself why he did it. But he did it. And because Benedict Arnold never did anything by halves, he decided to end the war by giving over the most valuable resource to the British that he could think of. He gained control or command of the lower Hudson Valley, which included West Point. At that time was not a military academy, but was a fort that was a very strategic fort protecting the Hudson River, and he decided to hand that over to the British. Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays about history, but sometimes history creates its own dramas. And I think the unfolding of Arnold's plot is one of those occasions that's worthy of Shakespeare. It came to a head on late September in 1780 when Arnold went down the Hudson River to Haverstraw Bay, which was neutral ground between the lines, and met with Major John André, the head of British intelligence. And the two of them talked over how they were going to do this invasion, take over West Point. Arnold gave Major André a map of the fort and some other documents, which we're fortunate to have right here today to look at. And then Arnold went home. He lived in a house on the opposite bank of the river, opposite West Point on the east bank of the Hudson River. After some delay, Major André on Saturday morning found himself, he'd gone over at Peekskill across the ferry and was on the east side himself, clip-clopping down on horseback towards the British lines. Major André was very excited, and he was very nervous. He was excited because he'd just pulled off the biggest intelligence coup of the entire war. It was going to make his career. And he was nervous because to get back to British lines, he had to go through a no man's land that was basically Westchester County. And he knew that there was patrols of both loyalist and patriot militia in that no man's land, and you couldn't tell the difference because they didn't wear uniforms. So he's got down almost to Tarrytown, what's now Sleepy Hollow, the land of the Headless Horseman. And he's riding along, and three men jump out of the bushes and stop him. And you can imagine what's going through his mind. And I think he made a little mistake, and he said, "I hope you are of our party." And one of the militiamen, they're all pointing muskets at his chest, one of the militiamen, who was maybe not as dumb as he looked, he said, "Oh yeah, what party is that?" And now Major André had to guess. And so he said the lower party. That was the British down in New York City. And the militiamen said, "We're Americans, get down." They searched him. They found these papers in his boot. André offered them bribes, including his gold watch and large amounts of money, and they refused all the bribes. And they became heroes after the war, or immediately, and were celebrated and were quite famous for a while. Their names were John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart. And they received the first military decorations, these silver medals saying fidelity on them, that were ever issued by the United States. One of which is right out there. You can have a look at it. So they took Major André to their commander, Colonel Jameson. Colonel Jameson was, I think, a little slow on the uptake, because the first thing he did was to send a letter to his commanding officer, Benedict Arnold, saying, there's something suspicious going on here, boss. But then he had second thoughts. After the courier is on his way to Arnold, he decided to send a letter to George Washington directly with the papers and the map. So we now come to the plot twist that maybe Shakespeare would have thought up. George Washington wasn't in the American camp, which was over on the New Jersey border. He had been out in Hartford, Connecticut, meeting with French officers, and he was on his way back, and he was due to have breakfast with Benedict Arnold on Monday morning at Arnold's house. So you get to Monday morning, you've got two couriers separately winding their way towards Arnold's house. The one courier had found out Washington was going to be there. And you have George Washington coming down from the north. He'd stayed the night in Fishkill to meet with Arnold, and they were going to go over and inspect West Point. And you have Benedict Arnold and his wife there waiting to have breakfast. So some of Washington's aides, I mean, this is a real nail-biter situation. Some of Washington's aides arrive. General Washington is just up the road. He'll be here in a few minutes. Get ready. One of the couriers arrives. Letter for General Arnold. He reads the letter, tells his wife, I got to go. Tells everybody else, I'm going over to West Point. Tell Washington to wait. He runs down to the boat launch, jumps on the boat, but then he tells the men, row as fast as you can southward. Washington arrives, Arnold's not there. He's over at West Point. Okay, Washington says, we'll go over and do the inspection now before breakfast. So Washington takes about half the cast of the musical Hamilton with him, including Alexander Hamilton and Lafayette and some other guys. They go across to West Point. There's no welcome. Where's Arnold? We haven't seen him in 2 days. And Washington's getting a little suspicious. And he said, well, we'll go ahead and do the inspection. He looks around West Point. The fortifications are falling down. There's not enough men there. What's going on? And later, George Washington described his own thinking at that point, and he said, my mind misgave me, but I did not have the least idea of the real cause. And I think we all can understand that feeling of something very wrong here, but I just can't figure out what it is. So he went back to Arnold's house, went up to take a nap. And before he undressed to get in bed, a courier arrived with a letter for General Washington. He looked at the letter, he looked at the documents, he knew immediately what had happened. He called in his most trusted subordinate, was Henry Knox, and he said, Arnold has betrayed us. Who can we trust now? It was not a rhetorical question, because Washington didn't know who was in on the plot and how far it went. So he sent Alexander Hamilton riding by horseback down the east bank of the Hudson to try to head off Arnold. He sent another messenger out to the army to try to get as many men on the march up to West Point as possible. And then the drama on top of the drama starts with Benedict Arnold's wife tearing her clothes off and screaming and having an hysterical fit. And she said, "I have to see Washington. They're going to kill my baby, but where's my husband?" And they all gather around, try to comfort her, because they don't imagine that a woman could be so devious that she would be in on it from the very beginning, at which she was, or that she could be so devious that she's putting on an act to help her husband escape. And he does escape. And he fought for the British for about a year afterwards. And then he went over to England with his family, and he never set foot in the United States again. A week later, Major André was hanged as a spy. One of Benedict Arnold's aides, a few days after his treason was revealed, made the comment that wouldn't it have been better if the bullet that went through his leg at Saratoga had gone through his heart. And historians down the years have repeated a similar idea, that if Benedict Arnold had been killed at Saratoga, he would be remembered as one of our greatest military heroes. And I think just from the achievements that I mentioned here today, you can see there is some validity to that idea, but I don't think it's true. I think that if Benedict Arnold had been killed at Saratoga, he would have been forgotten. And just like Nathaniel Greene, Henry Knox, Daniel Morgan, Richard Montgomery, and all the heroes of the Revolution who've been forgotten over the years. I lived down in the Hudson Valley. We have Putnam County, we have Sullivan County, we have Greene County. But you ask people, they don't know who these counties are named after. I grew up in Wayne County, which is upstate in western New York. I even went to a school called Wayne Central. We never had Anthony Wayne Day. We never had a statue of Anthony Wayne. And we never learned why Mad Anthony Wayne was mad. So I'm hoping that as we approach this 250th anniversary that Devin mentioned, that there can be some new attention given to those who just did the fighting. We'll remember Benedict Arnold, okay, but what about all the others? And particularly all those who were in the ranks and lived through that very long 8-year struggle for independence and to create a country. Because if you read the letters and diaries of that time, they often mention that they felt that they were sacrificing for the freedom of generations unborn. They use that term. And we are those generations. And they were fighting for us. Thank you. So I hope people have some questions, comments, observations. Yes?
Well, what about Mad Anthony Wayne?
Well, that's a whole other story.
Go to Indiana and find out.
Well, he had a long life ahead of him. Yeah. Yeah.
You said that Peggy Shippen was definitely involved from the beginning. Isn't that kind of controversial? I mean, they don't really know, do they?
It is controversial to a certain extent. It seems so obvious to me that I say that. You know, I think there are probably books written saying that she wasn't involved, but certainly she was involved in the plot because she was the connection that Arnold had to Major André. Whether she was putting on an act there, I think she was. I mean, it just seems too obvious to me. But one of the great things about history is, there's always new things. There's still new documents coming out, and someday the questions may all be answered. But it makes for an interesting thing. Yes.
Was she a British subject or born in this country in a colonial supporter at the beginning?
Peggy Shippen. She was an American. Her family was quite a prominent family in Philadelphia, and they leaned towards loyalist, as did many people in Philadelphia. And the British, of course, took over Philadelphia in 1777 and held it for a period of time. And then when the British left, was after Saratoga, and Washington decided to put Arnold in charge of sort of the transition back to civilian rule in Philadelphia, and he got to know all the families in Philadelphia, particularly the loyalist-leaning families, because they were the rich people, and he was a rich man himself. So he met her then and courted her and married her, and they had a child, and she accompanied him over to England and stuck by him, and they had several more children over there. Yeah.
Where was Arnold from?
Benedict Arnold was born in Norwich, Connecticut, on the very eastern end of Connecticut, above New London, and he then settled in New Haven, and he was a very successful businessman and sort of an international trader in New Haven, and he is often referred to as a apothecary, because he did apprentice as an apothecary, but that was just sort of the base of his trading empire. So one of the ironies of Arnold is that after he went over to the British, one of the things that he did for the British was to burn New London, and that was practically his backyard. And he went up and attacked New London. It was the last big battle in the North of the whole war. And after that, he went over to England. Yeah.
Kenneth Roberts describes Arnold as an acrobat. Was he accurate?
An acrobat?
Yeah, in a circus.
Not that I don't know anything about him being in a circus, but he was very athletic, and he was noted for being, strong. He was not a real tall man, but he was very strong and very athletic, great horseback rider. I don't know. That would be interesting to find out if that was true. Yeah.
What was the relationship like between Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold?
Well, during 1776, they had quite a good relationship. Arnold was torn a little bit because the overall commander for 75 and 76 in the North was Philip Schuyler, and Schuyler was not a great soldier, but he was a great like a logistics man. And General Gates was under him, but there was a lot of tension between those two, and Arnold was friendly with both of them, and it was sort of pulled apart. In 1777, when Arnold went up there after putting in his resignation, he did have conflicts with Gates. They had I think largely because they were both under such amount of stress. They had big arguments back and forth, which gave rise to a lot of those stories I was talking about, that Arnold wasn't the main man at the Battle of Saratoga. But I think that if you look at all the records, that dispute, the personal dispute, did not really come into have a big influence on their professional relationship, and that Gates would never have, diminished Arnold's role because he was the best general he had under him. So, yeah. Okay, yes. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
Probably despite not knowing definitively his motivations for his treason, being passed over, I think, is one of the more accepted reasons. Do you think if he hadn't gotten injured, would Washington have still passed him over for advancement, or did Washington hold his success against Arnold?
No. First of all, George Washington would have liked to have handled all the promotions, but the setup was that Congress was responsible for all the promotions of almost all the officers, at least the higher, from maybe colonel on up. So Washington regretted that Arnold had not gotten the promotions he deserved, but he couldn't do anything about it. He left that to Congress. That was part of Congress's power of civilian rule over the military. And he, by the time he had come to the Battle of Saratoga, he'd gotten every promotion he deserved and could have gotten. Major General was the highest level below Washington himself, and he was a Major General, and he had his seniority restored, which was one of his issues. So he'd already gotten all the promotion. At that point, it wasn't. He was still, I think, disgruntled, but it wasn't that wasn't the cause so much after he got wounded. We don't think so much about post-traumatic stress disorder in the 18th century, but there's really no reason to believe that it didn't exist. And Arnold had seen it. He was not a trained soldier. He'd seen a lot of very brutal action. He'd risked his life, and it's a possibility that he was a little bit deranged by that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read that Arnold's life in Britain was not necessarily what they expected. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, he went over to Britain. He got a reasonable amount of money. He got some favors from the British that they sort of agreed to, that all his sons were made officers in the British Army as they got older. And Peggy also got some money, which I guess would be another reason to think that she maybe was involved in the plot, because they gave her a pretty good sum of money. He went back into business. They moved to Canada. They lived in Canada for a number of years in a community that was a lot of American exiles. He got back into trading a little bit. He was always he was a prickly character, and he never got along with his neighbors very well. And when he went to Britain, he'd help them out, but nobody likes a traitor kind of thing. So he would go to the theater, and people would hiss at him and Peggy. So he then mainly got back into international trading, but down to mostly the West Indies, and that's what he did for the rest of his life. Was he happy? He didn't seem like a guy that was ever all that happy, and he certainly. He never thought of himself as a traitor, and he never apologized or said, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that." It was just that's the way he was. Yeah. Yeah.
I watched a movie, a very pro-Benedict Arnold movie called Hero Betrayed. And it actually suggests that he was a very wealthy man, and that he had, in fact, really put a lot of his personal wealth into into the cause. And that this was another reason. I mean, he had done so much, and he'd been wounded, and all of this, and that's kind of the gist of that movie. So can you speak a little bit about his personal life?
Yeah, he was the wealthiest man in New Haven at the time the war broke out. He had the biggest house. One thing I think is interesting, just on a biographical thing about Arnold, was that his father was quite successful himself and had a trading business in Norwich, and became an alcoholic. And in Arnold's childhood, one of his duties was to go out and collect his father laying in the street or passed out in some tavern there. The business went down. They were quite a well-to-do family. His mother was from an established family there, but Arnold had to drop out of school and become an apprentice, which was a pretty big drop. And have these experiences of seeing his father helplessly drunk. And that sort of pushed him towards this constant wanting to more and more success. And he was very successful. And he followed in his father's footsteps, got the trading business. And as far as the money in the Revolution, he did spend his own money. He was involved in the invasion of Canada, which I didn't really go into, but he spent quite a bit of money up there. His business went downhill, partly because of the war and partly because he wasn't around to run it. And he left it to his wife, who then died quite soon after the capture of Ticonderoga, and his sister took over the business. But it was mainly just a steady decline. So some people say, well, he spent all his money and he wanted more money, and that's why he came up with a plot. The British were going to pay him. But in looking at all the factors, I didn't think that was believable. Why did he spend all the money? Why did he give up his business if money was his whole life, as some historians have said? And he was always able. He was very versatile. He was always able to come back and make more money. And he had a lot more money than he got paid by the British, that he made from his own business when he was in England. So I think it's a factor, but I don't think it's the explanation. Yes.
Speak to his injury in Quebec. I know he was injured.
Yeah, the Americans. One of the things I cover in this book is the great expedition that he led over the Maine mountains to come at Quebec, the city of Quebec, from another angle. And General Montgomery was leading the Maine invasion up the St. Lawrence River, and Arnold's coming over. And but by the time Montgomery got up there, it was very late in the season. It was snowing, and they decided, and a lot of the troops that they brought up there their enlistment was running out at the end of the year. So the last day of the year, Montgomery decided to attack Quebec, a walled city that had never been successfully captured. And in the middle of the snowstorm, Arnold was leading one wing of the fight and got shot in the leg, a flesh wound in his leg. And he was laid up, and took him quite a while to get back in action. And then that same leg was, they think, because they're never clear about these medical things. They think that it shattered his shin bone. His leg ended up a couple inches shorter, and very painful wound. But the first wound in that same leg was up in Quebec, and
He recovered to go to Belfort Island shortly thereafter.
yeah, he recovered totally from that after a few months. It was. They do describe that one as it came down through his calf and landed wedged in above the Achilles tendon. So they were able to take the bullet out, and there was no bone damage done in that one. Yeah.
Well, having a tour in Saratoga where there's a statue encased in a wrought iron only good part we could memorialize was the boot from the knee down. I don't know if it's still there, but.
It's still there. Yeah, absolutely. That's somebody put that up, I think, in the late 19th century. They didn't want to honor him. It doesn't mention his name. A officer, here's his boot, because we're honoring his leg that got wounded. There was a lot of kind of this mythology around surrounded, because if Benedict Arnold was such a terrible traitor, then the rest of us were so much better in comparison. And that's the way people, I think, one of the reasons he became the synonym for treason was that it made everybody else feel better. Oh, we may be bad, but we're not that bad, you know. So, and that was that whole thing of erasing every. The Romans invented what they now call cancel culture. That was a Roman thing where they would go back and erase all the previous emperor, or some guy that had been a hero, but now he's been supplanted. So they would erase it, every mention of him, and that's what happened to Arnold in various places at West Point. And I think it's really just it's part of the sort of pageantry of history. Yes.
The popular short story, The Devil and Daniel Webster, also mentions Arnold as one of the major traitors.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that story?
I think I read that in 5th grade.
Yeah, no, it was great then. And it was a popular film, but the fellow who signed the contract with the devil to become successful, when he wants to get out of the contract, he goes to the great lawyer Daniel Webster, and Webster has a trial. The devil sets up a trial with all these famous traitors.
Ah.
And Webster asked, "But isn't General Arnold here?" And they say, "No, he's off doing something else."
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, it's interesting because the issue of treason, then if you start looking more broadly, Robert E. Lee, for example, committed treason, was responsible for many tens of thousands of American soldiers being killed. When I was in school, at least, he was considered quite an honorable man. And now that's changing a little bit, but in 1861, he was compared to Benedict Arnold. And they said he makes Arnold look good by comparison. So. Yeah, one more question, the last question. Yes.
I don't know how much is a question, but a few comments. Maybe you could elaborate on these things. One is that it wasn't as crazy as it sounds to be attacking us in Canada, or to think of Canadians as being part of this movement to freedom from the British Empire. If you look ahead, there's things you can see that also are telling that Benjamin Franklin, at the point they were negotiating the treaty to end the war, was saying, "Give us Canada." Like, he was still negotiating for that during the treaty negotiations, because he said, you know, they're part of us. They're in the same boat. And it didn't go anywhere, but it was something that he lobbied for a long time. So I don't know that it's really was so much purely invasion. It depends on who you're talking to. And when you look into, I mean, Franklin had spent time, and so from his perspective, we're aligned. But not everyone thought that. The other thing is about Arnold. There are a number of things. You know, he did pledge his own fortune, and he did spend his own money to pay his men and get them medical care and things like that. But there's so much more to the story. He took hits from people politically who were after Washington. you can also look at that in a number of different cases, but when he ends up as the person in charge of Philadelphia after the British occupation, he does want to rebuild his fortune. He does want to be able to conduct trade and conduct business. And he ended up, I think you know about the court-martial, but having Washington say, wait and see, let the process happen, and then he gets a reprimand. I don't know what the exact timing is, we'd have to look at that, but I think he was looking at all of his options and the fact that there were people that were after Arnold who were after Washington, and he's taking hits for Washington again. And Washington is saying, just wait, then he reprimands him. I mean, there are a lot of reasons that the guy had, he's trying to rebuild his fortune, he's trying to do something, he allows a ship to come in that has some goods on it that he wants to trade as the military leader of Philadelphia. And then he's getting in trouble for that. But lots of other people were doing that kind of stuff. And he's thinking, we are no better than the British if we're gonna be doing these things. And he did want to make sure that he was taken care of. Again, we can see that that's, from one perspective, that's wrong, but from another perspective, I don't know. And Washington eventually does create the Purple Heart, what became the Purple Heart, to award people who have been injured in service. And, you know, maybe if there had been some recognition and more for someone like Arnold, maybe his honor would have been enough, even if he did restore his fortune.
Yeah.
But he wasn't getting recognition. He didn't get the sword from Burgoyne at Saratoga. He's not being recognized. He's being stopped. He's being thwarted. He's injured. He's given up money. And Gates, who he was having all these conflicts with, look at the Newburgh conspiracy. Who's the guy they go to when they can't get Washington to march on the Continental Congress and say, I'm here, I'm taking over? They're turning to Gates. If you look at the story of the Newburgh conspiracy, Gates, who he never wanted to have at Newburgh.
Well, that's getting beyond a little Benedict Arnold's participation, but I'm glad to see that you're a Benedict Arnold fan. And I agree with you. Canada, the invasion of Canada, which is not a very well-known aspect of the Revolutionary War, is an interesting case because the British had only controlled it for 12 years. It was almost entirely French, with some Americans who had gone up there to try to make profits. It was not a British colony so much as a French colony, even then. And it's a very complicated situation, but it made perfect sense in a way for the Americans to try to capture Canada because it would take away the base for the invasion down Lake Ticonderoga as well. But as far as the money and Arnold's reasons for him being disgruntled, they're very complicated and I think very opaque in a lot of ways. It's like many officers were passed over for promotion. Many officers were disrespected. Many officers spent their own money, but none of the other ones committed treason.
Arnold took a lot of hits, though, from people that
Yeah, and Washington.
He felt Washington would vindicate him. And
absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely true. And Washington really loved Arnold, not only as a soldier but as a person. And it was a blow to have to take the reprimand from Washington, but he deserved it too. So.